We reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
Ready to dive into your daily dose of news?
Bringing you what's trending in the West and all that's setting trends in the East.
And all of this served up with a side of insightful banter.
We don't just bring you the latest stories.
We bring you your talking points for the day.
And while you do that, from the busy streets of New York, I will provide you with deeper insights on the developments through the course of the day in the US.
And I will be here at the WION headquarters, getting you all the action from the universe of sport. All that you need to know about your favorite teams and players right here.
The show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of. A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA. Join the conversation.
Welcome back. You're watching WION World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of the rest. I'm Shivan Chandra.
And I'm Hem Kaur Suro. And on the show today, after US President Joe Biden's threat to cut off weapons supplies to Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains adamant, says his country is prepared to stand alone if necessary. Now the question is, can Israel really carry out its military actions without the United States support? That's something we'll explore on the show today.
Also on the show, Russia mentioned recently that US has provided no reliable information about the involvement of Indian nationals in the alleged plot to kill Khalistani terrorist Gurpratpan Singh Pannu. A day later, the US says that it is satisfied with India's efforts to ensure accountability in the alleged murder plot. Lots more lined up on the show right here on World DNA. We are going to be exploring this and a lot more. Let's get you started with the headlines.
Defiant Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to stand alone, brushes off comments by US President Joe Biden that he would not supply offensive weapons that Israel could use to launch an all-out assault on Rafah.
Both Hamas and Israeli delegations leave Egypt as truce talks in Cairo remain inconclusive. Hamas says ball is completely in Israel's court now.
Israeli warplanes strike Gaza's crowded southern city of Rafah even after US President Joe Biden said he would stop supplying artillery shells to Israel if a full-scale assault goes ahead.
Israeli singer Eden Golan qualifies for the final of the Eurovision Song Contest despite protests.
Stormy Daniels finishes her marathon testimony at Donald Trump's hush money trial. Attorneys for the former president seek to paint her as a greedy liar who profited from her allegations.
The US ambassador to India says that the United States is satisfied with India's response to an alleged assassination plot of Khalistani terrorist Gurpratpan Pannu on US soil. A Boeing passenger plane comes off the runway during takeoff from Dakar International Airport in Senegal, leaving at least 11 injured. The Air Senegal flight was bound for the Malian capital Bamako with 78 passengers on board.
All right, our top focus on World DNA this morning after US President Joe Biden's threat to cut off weapons and artillery shell supply to Israel if it invades Rafah city of Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is prepared to stand alone.
Well, we are going to be tracking this closely. We are going to be asking some pertinent questions with a guest who will be joining us later. As of now, in a video statement, he said, if we must, we shall fight with our fingernails. But we have much more than our fingernails. The Netanyahu government so far had maintained silence over Washington holding back a shipment of aerial bombs. But after Joe Biden's warning, he said, without specifically mentioning it, that if we must stand alone, we shall stand alone. Listen to this.
We are on the eve of our Independence Day. In the War of Independence 76 years ago, we were the few against the many. We did not have weapons. There was an arms embargo on Israel, but with great strength of spirit, heroism and unity among us, we were victorious. Today, we are much stronger. We are determined and we are united in order to defeat our enemies and those who want to destroy us. If we need to stand alone, we will stand alone. I have said that, if necessary, we will fight with our fingernails. But we have much more than fingernails, and with that same strength of spirit, with God's help, together, we will win.
Netanyahu's statements were echoed by the other two voting members of his war cabinet, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and centrist former Defense Minister Benny Gantz. In a speech, Gallant categorically said that the state of Israel cannot be subdued. We will stand strong. We will achieve our goals. We will hit Hamas, we will hit Hezbollah.
Well, Gantz remarked on social media, and I'm going to quote here from that remark, the United States has a moral and strategic duty to extend to Israel the tools that are necessary for this mission.
I turn to Israel's enemies as well as to our best friends and say, the state of Israel cannot be subdued, not the IDF, not the defense establishment and not the state of Israel. We will stand strong, we will achieve our goals and we will hit Hamas, we will hit Hezbollah, we will achieve security.
Well, that was the statement by Yoav Gallant. Gallant's statement, it clearly underlines the scale of the standoff between the Biden administration and the Israeli government now.
Meanwhile, Palestinian residents said that Israeli forces bombarded areas of Rafah. An Israeli attack near a mosque killed at least 3 people and injured others in the eastern neighborhood. Video footage from the scene showed the minaret lying in the rubble and 2 bodies wrapped in blankets. An Israeli air strike on 2 houses in the Sabra neighborhood of Rafah killed at least 12 people, including women and children. Among the dead was the senior commander of the militant Al-Mujahideen brigades and the family of another group leader.
Israeli tanks seized control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah border, crossing with Egypt earlier this week, and are currently probing the outskirts of the nearby city of Rafah. Netanyahu has not so far ordered troops to enter the city, where Israel says 4 battalions of Hamas fighters are based.
On the other hand, the latest round of indirect negotiations in Cairo to halt hostilities in Gaza had ended. Hamas announced that its delegation attending the negotiations has left Cairo for Qatar, adding that the ball is now completely in Israel's court. The group said that it stood by the proposal submitted by the mediators, but Israel has rejected it.
And of course, the situation at the moment raises many questions. We're now being joined by Ano Kling, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you for having me.
Now, sir, I want to begin by asking you, of course, talks have failed once again. Neither side is willing to compromise. We've seen the statements that are coming out of the United States as well. Israel, on the other hand, remains adamant, saying that if it has to stand alone, it will stand alone. The question here is, can Israel sustain this fight entirely on its own? And what is the reason for Israel being so adamant on the Rafah offensive?
Well, we do, in fact, find ourselves at a very precarious point in time. And I'm sure most of your viewers would agree that it's unfortunate that we cannot return to the days of October 6th, the day prior to the barbaric Hamas attack on Israel. But we find ourselves now at a point where I think Hamas is taking, the military wing of Hamas at least, it's taking its last breaths as the Israeli Defense Force is focusing its efforts to eliminating those last 4 battalions in and around Rafah. And of course, we know Hamas is surrounding itself with civilians and has its facilities actually, many of which are subterranean under civilian facilities. So Israel understands that it faces an existential threat if the Hamas military threat is not eliminated. And thus I believe that the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the war cabinet, which includes people that frankly are politically not supporters of the prime minister. They have resigned themselves to finishing the military mission of destroying Hamas. And that's what we are seeing now. And time will tell how long this operation will take.
Mr. Klink, where does Israel get its confidence from? Rather, where does Netanyahu get that confidence from that we'll stand alone if we have to? Everyone understands the dependency on the US arms and ammunitions. Where does that confidence come from?
Well, there's certainly some dependency, if you will, on American defense industry to supply Israel with certain types of weapons. I am confident in saying that the Israeli Defense Forces probably have enough stocks to last them for quite some time. Based on the war stocks that they have accumulated over the years. And of course, the Israeli government has to demonstrate strength and its commitment to finishing the job that was forced upon them on October 7th when Hamas attacked. So this is also, I believe, a part of the Israeli negotiating strategy to get Hamas to free the hostages as part and parcel of a ceasefire. They have to maintain the military pressure on Hamas in order to have Hamas make concessions. Because remember, we're talking about a ceasefire. We very rarely, and this is very unfortunate in my view, talk about the plight of the Israeli hostages. And when one considers that what has become public in the last several days as word of this, the counter proposal that Hamas presented, you know, Hamas is actually now admitting that the total number of hostages, how many of them are still alive, is frankly in dispute. And this is, I think, something very serious for all of us to consider.
Right, sir. Another thing that I just wanted to gain clarity on, you mentioned that Hamas's military wing, it is breathing its last. That being said, some would argue that the Hamas ideology is still very much intact, and it's the humanitarian toll and the cost of this war that is now mounting, and which is the reason that it's now appears, without the United States support as well, that it's Israel against the world. So how do you see the situation panning out in that regard?
So you're right. You can't necessarily kill an ideology. You're absolutely right. I would say that, you know, throughout history, there have been times, obviously World War II being first, perhaps amongst historical examples, where the unconditional surrender of Nazism was required to bring to the World War II to an end. In terms of the ideology of Hamas, I personally believe, and there are many that support this view, that the tragedy that has befallen Gaza is due to Hamas's intransigence, to the fact that Hamas has vowed repeatedly to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That position has not changed. Hamas's leaders continue to say if they had the opportunity to do the attacks of October 7th again, they would. So the only peaceful future, I think, that the residents of Gaza have any hope for is one that does not include the leadership of Hamas.
All right. Thank you so much for joining in, Mr. Klink. That was Eno Klink, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, joining us from Washington, D.C. Pleasure speaking with you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let's shift our focus now. The key witness in former U.S. President Donald Trump's hush money case, Stormy Daniels, took the stand for the second time.
It was definitely an explosive interaction that she had, and that has made headlines all over the world. Trump's lawyers continued their attacks on the credibility of Daniels' story. Defense attorney Susan accused the adult film star of making up the story of having physical relations with Trump to make money, facing questioning on Thursday by the defense lawyer in a Manhattan courtroom. Daniels stuck to her account altogether.
Right, her unfaltering account of sexual encounter with Trump while he was married to Melania Trump riveted jurors and reminded the U.S. voters of the lurid aspects of his 2017 to 2021 presidency as he campaigns to win back the White House this year.
Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up his former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen's payment to Daniels, but for buying her silence ahead of the 2016 U.S. presidential election about the alleged encounter. Trump has denied ever having sex with Daniels. He's denied all those charges, and Trump is the Republican candidate challenging Democratic President Joe Biden in the November U.S. elections pending little later this year. He has often called the trial a politically motivated attempt to undermine his campaign.
An angry Donald Trump attacked the judge and declared his innocence in his hush money case as he left the courthouse for the day on Thursday evening.
This judge, what he did and what his ruling was is a disgrace. Everybody saw what happened today. He's a corrupt judge and he's totally conflicted. And I got to get back on the campaign trail. I'm not supposed to be here. We are so innocent. There's never been anything like it.
Now for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani tells us how recent legal developments have affected Trump's criminal trials and what implications this will have for the 2024 election as well. Listen to this.
Donald Trump secured significant legal victories this week, with 2 of his criminal trials likely to be delayed until after the 2024 election. A judge scrapped a May trial date for the classified documents case, and the Georgia Court of Appeals will hear Trump's request to remove the prosecutor in the election interference case. If the former president wins the election, he could potentially make the 2 federal cases against him go away, and it's unclear if the Georgia case could proceed against the sitting president. The delays vindicate Trump's legal strategy for sure.
As the Russia-Ukraine war rages on, Ukrainian forces are pulling out all stops to prevent Russian troops from progressing deeper into the country.
Right, now these are the visuals on your screens right now from eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region, where Russian forces are creeping in, taking the front lines deeper into Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian soldiers are scrambling in order to build fortified defensive lines and fend off Russian attacks.
We can see them shelling somewhere between 6 and 8 in the morning. They are preparing for an assault. After 8, the infantry units started advancing.
Given the developments on the eastern front line, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Thursday that the army is facing a quote-unquote really difficult situation in eastern regions.
It is important that we are not just living, but we are fighting, we are fortifying, strengthening, we are reaching agreements. We apply maximum pressure on our partners for increased weapons delivery. If the weapons delivery is increased, we will be able to stop in the east where they have the advantage, which is not a secret. We need to stop them and take over the advantage.
While Zelensky was addressing a joint presser with the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola, air sirens were heard in the background.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has also ramped up its attack on Russian territory. In the latest, Ukrainian shelling on border villages in Russia's Belgorod region and Kursk Oblast regions respectively. And as per governors of both regions, the attack killed 2 people on Thursday.
Now, that being said, Ukraine is evidently feeling the heat on the battlefield. Russia is pushing ahead. Ukraine's armory is almost empty.
Well, senior generals are saying that strategic retreat is the only option in many areas. Now, interestingly, Italy, which holds the rotating presidency of the G7, is saying that sanctions aren't working and it's time to engage in a dialogue with Moscow. Our next report explores the reasons for this realization.
With Moscow seizing the initiative in the Russia-Ukraine war, the Ukrainian forces find themselves outgunned and outnumbered. Kyiv hopes the much-awaited delivery of US weapons will turn the tide in its favor. The West has been arming Ukraine for over 2 years with weapons worth billions, from advanced missiles to millions of rounds of artillery. But beyond the battlefield, a much larger economic warfare is underway. The West has slapped Russian individuals and entities with over 18,700 sanctions. Today, it is the world's most sanctioned nation. But has the economic blockade achieved its goals? The EU now wants to target Russia's liquefied natural gas sector. But the EU wants to keep a small loophole of ship-to-ship transfer. That would mean that Russian gas won't directly land on European ports. Despite the raging war in Ukraine, Europe has bought over 15.6 million metric tons of Russian gas last year. However, Europe realizes the sanctions are not hurting Putin's war chest. Italy, which holds the rotating presidency of G7, says economic sanctions against Russia have failed. It is calling on the West to try harder to negotiate a diplomatic solution with President Putin to end the war in Ukraine. European leaders are also wary that a change of guard in the White House could change its strategy on Russia. Donald Trump says the US can't keep funding a never-ending war. The big question is, does peace have a chance in Ukraine? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Hungary, the last stop in his first Europe trip in 5 years.
Well, the 6-day trip is being seen as an opportunity for Xi Jinping to charm the continent and its people at a time of global tensions. But at the same time, it is also being feared as a way for China to sow divisions as Xi tries to create a wedge between the West and the US.
Now, all 3 nations Xi visited in his tour, that's France, Serbia and Hungary, gave him a red carpet welcome. Xi Jinping received warm gifts. People were also out on the streets to see him.
Xi Jinping's visit comes at a time when tensions are growing between China and the European Union nations, as Xi Jinping made a move to re-engage with the continent. He chose to visit France, that is a traditional European centre, but his other stops, Serbia and Hungary, are the 2 nations with autocratic leaders seen as China-friendly and also close to Russian President Putin.
In France, Xi Jinping and Macron shared some personal gestures. In meeting with Macron and EU chief Ursula von der Leyen, the focus remained on trade and Ukraine. However, Xi Jinping didn't budge on his stance on Russia, nor did he significantly tilt the existing balance of trade in Europe's favor.
In Serbia, Xi Jinping's visit coincided with the 25th anniversary of NATO's mistargeted bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Xi Jinping and his Serbian counterpart Alexander Vučić signed 29 agreements on cooperation in multiple theatres. Both leaders also pledged to follow a vision of a shared future.
And in Hungary, Xi Jinping offered warm praise for Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Orbán has resisted EU sanctions against Moscow and abstained from providing military support to Kyiv. Xi Jinping is scheduled to meet Orbán later in the day with the war in Ukraine and infrastructure projects high on the agenda. While other EU nations are trying to reduce dependence on Beijing, Hungary and Serbia are increasing their engagement.
Both nations are also part of an agreement with Beijing to modernize the railway between their capitals of Budapest and Belgrade. And this agreement is part of the Belt and Road plan to connect with a Chinese-controlled port in Greece as an entry point for Chinese goods to Central and Eastern Europe.
And as always, now it's time for a short break.
Don't go anywhere. This is World DNA. Of course, there is going to be more on the other side of the break. When we come back, the United States that is satisfied with India's, it stated that it's satisfied with India's efforts to ensure accountability in the alleged assassination plots of Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. And US Ambassador to India Eric Garcetti confirmed that at a US think tank event. This is what he said. We will be bringing you the latest on that.
Also on the other side, China faces a mounting retirement crisis as significant portions of its workforce find themselves unable to afford to retire at all. All details on the other side. Do stay tuned for that report.
Rains, misery, destruction and death. Cyclone Hidaya strikes East Africa as governments in Kenya and Tanzania struggle to protect millions from its wrath. A struggling town of El Hencha in Tunisia is gripped by an exodus of youth seeking a better life in Europe. And countries in Europe are in a rush to return treasures stolen during the pre- and post-colonial era to their countries of origin. World of Africa at 100. At these times, only on WION, World is One.
In this episode of Makers of New India, we are featuring a brand that has changed the entire hand-woven carpet industry.
I took 5,000 rupees from my father as a loan and started this business. I thought that I must start this business with those artisans because they are rejected by the society.
Right now we are a global brand. We ship to 85 plus countries around the globe.
There are 18 different processes that goes into making the final product that you see at the showroom or the retail stores in India.
Know more, understand better, think ahead. Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Get the facts, not the bombast. On the 26th of March, dynamic pricing, Baloch separatists, Gravitas cuts out the clutter. Gravitas keeps calm when others scream. Gravitas brings news to life. Weekdays 9 p.m. IST, 3:30 p.m. GMT. Gravitas. Seeing is believing.
The biggest democratic exercise on the planet ever. Decoding the multiple colors of this multi-dimensional, multi-layered spectacle. WION deciphers the images and the hues. Sifts real performance from rhetoric and noise, claims and counterclaims, populist pitches and hidden truths. Untangling, unraveling this celebration of democracy.
Welcome back. You're watching World DNA. Let's get you started with the headlines we're tracking for you at this hour.
Defiant Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vows to stand alone, brushes off comments by US President Joe Biden that he would not supply offensive weapons that Israel could use to launch an all-out assault on Rafah.
Both Hamas and Israeli delegations leave Egypt as truce talks in Cairo remain inconclusive. Hamas says ball is completely now in Israel's court.
Israeli warplanes strike Gaza's crowded southern city of Rafah even after US President Joe Biden said he would stop supplying artillery shells to Israel if a full-scale assault goes ahead.
Israeli singer Eden Golan qualifies for the final of the Eurovision Song Contest despite protests.
Stormy Daniels finishes her marathon testimony at Donald Trump's hush money trial. Attorneys for the former president seek to paint her as a greedy liar who profited from her allegations. The US ambassador to India says that the United States is satisfied with India's response to an alleged assassination plot in Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu on US soil. A Boeing passenger plane comes off the runway during takeoff from Dhaka International Airport in Senegal, leaving at least 11 injured. The Air Senegal flight was bound for Malian capital Bamako with 78 passengers on board.
The United States is satisfied with India's efforts to ensure accountability in the alleged assassination plot of Khalistani terrorist Gurpatman Singh Pannu.
Now, speaking at a US think tank event, the US ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, also said that many steps are still needed because this is a red line for America and its citizens.
The statement comes after US prosecutors charged an Indian citizen with plotting to kill Khalistani terrorist in November last year, who is also a US citizen. Eric Garcetti said a criminal case and indictment have been brought into the case. He added that if the murder is connected to any of the state actors, then there has to be accountability.
Meanwhile, India awaits information from Canada on 3 Indians charged with the murder of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The Canadian authorities are probing their links with the government.
The Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal revealed that India had an idea about the arrest. However, he added that New Delhi was yet to receive a formal notice and relevant evidences regarding the case.
We have been telling them that, you are giving political space to separatist, extremists and people who advocate violence. They are acting against India. We also have asked them to extradite several people. We have also conveyed our concerns regarding our diplomats not being threatened and not being allowed to carry out their functions.
The 3 accused were identified as 28-year-old Karanpreet Singh, 22-year-old Kamalpreet Singh and Karan Brar, also aged 22. The 3 Indian nationals face charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar was shot dead outside Gurdwara in Vancouver in June last year. Following the incident, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cited the involvement of Indian government in the killing, sparking a political row with New Delhi. The Maldives foreign minister is currently on his first official visit to India. Musa Zamir arrived in New Delhi on Wednesday and held a meeting with his Indian counterpart.
WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal spoke to the Maldives minister on the island's relations with India and China. Here are a few excerpts from this exclusive conversation.
What's your take when it comes to Indian tourists traveling to Maldives?
India obviously is one of the very key source markets for the Maldivian tourism. If you look at the statistics earlier this year, we have in Maldives inward tourism has had a growth of about 16%, but the Indian tourism market, the source market, has actually tremendously decreased, obviously with some issues that we have had. I don't think it's an issue with the government, because you could recall there was some remarks which was derogatory in nature towards the leadership of India, and then I think I have issued a statement, and it was not the view of the government, and it definitely is not the president or the people of Maldives views Indian leadership or Indians as such. So,
government in Maldives is seen pro-China, not very pro-India. Would you reaffirm your India first policy, or how do you see it as?
The current government is a pro-Maldives government. So we have good relations with all development partners, all bilateral allies. We have a good relation with India as well as China. China has been a development partner with Maldives, in the past decade or so.
There have been visits of the Chinese vessels as well, research vessels, spy vessels, term can be used differently.
Well, actually, the vessel in question, in January 2024, we received a request for diplomatic clearance of a vessel for peaceful purposes for port call. And we issued as they requested, like we have been issuing many others. We will definitely be very sensitive to any needs of our neighbors. We will make sure that Indian Ocean is a peaceful place, and a peaceful Indian Ocean is good for India as well as it's good for Maldives.
All right, on to news now from the world of business. In the aftermath of the ongoing conflict in Gaza, Israel finds itself grappling with the staggering financial aftermath.
Data from the finance ministry shows the total cost of conflict at $16 billion. The nation's budget deficit has surged to surpass 7% of its gross domestic product. A significant portion of this expenditure, nearly 36%, has been allocated to defense. Despite efforts to mitigate the fiscal impact, tax revenues have declined by 2.2%, exacerbating the widening fiscal gap.
Now, the financial toll of the conflict extends beyond immediate expenditures. The central bank estimates the total cost over the span of 3 years to reach $68 billion. This fiscal strain is also manifested in the currency markets, with the Israeli shekel depreciating by 4.5% against major currencies since the conflict began. Also, delays in tax payments due to cultural observances such as Passover have added to the challenges, contributing to a wider fiscal shortfall.
To address the mounting fiscal challenges, the Israeli government has proposed fiscal adjustments equivalent to 1.1% of the GDP. These measures aim to stabilize finances amid soaring costs. However, the bulk of immediate financial needs are being met through borrowing, with monthly bond sales tripling in size since the onset of the conflict. Despite these efforts, international rating agencies maintain a negative outlook. Moody's and S&P have downgraded Israel's sovereign rating, underscoring the severity of the financial strain. China is facing a mounting retirement crisis as a significant portion of its workforce finds itself unable to afford to stop working.
Right now, with 13% of its workforce over the age of 60, rivaling figures seen in the United States, the strain on government benefits is palpable. Take a look at this next report for more on this.
China is facing a demographic challenge unlike any other. Its rapidly aging population is putting immense strain on the country's social security system. Currently, 94 million people, or 13% of the workforce, are over the age of 60. This number is expected to skyrocket in the coming decade, with an estimated 300 million people reaching retirement age. The existing pension system is already struggling. In urban areas, pensions range from $400 to $800. But for rural residents, the minimum monthly pension is meager $17. This vast disparity leaves many elderly in poverty, especially considering the rising healthcare costs associated with aging. This crisis is further compounded by the one-child policy implemented from 1980 to 2015. With fewer children to support them, the burden of caring for the elderly is falling on a shrinking younger generation. High youth unemployment rates further limit the support available from this demographic. The Chinese government is grappling with how to address this looming crisis. One potential solution is raising the retirement age, currently among the lowest globally at 60 for men and 50 to 55 for women. However, public perception is a hurdle, with concerns that such a move would benefit the elite at the expense of ordinary citizens. Another challenge is the delicate balance between economic growth and social spending. Policymakers have prioritized growth, directing resources towards innovation and industrial development. However, critics argue that neglecting social spending creates long-term problems. The future of China's retirement security remains uncertain. The depletion of the pension system by 2035, as estimated by the Chinese Academy of Social Science, paints a concerning picture. The government is exploring options like private retirement schemes and transferring funds to struggling provinces. However, the effectiveness of these measures is yet to be seen. The report, WION, World is One.
All right, on to developments now from the world of technology. We're starting with TikTok, that is taking steps to now ensure transparency. The platform will now use content credentials which is a digital watermark to indicate how images and videos were created and edited. The ByteDance owner-owned app aims to address concerns about misinformation and disinformation on its platform. The idea is to prevent AI-generated content from being misused, particularly in the context of the upcoming US elections.
The content credentials software has been developed by Adobe. The tech has been adopted by other companies as well, including ChatGPT creator OpenAI. To activate this system, both the AI tool creator and the platform must agree to the industry standard. For instance, images generated by OpenAI's DALL-E tool will be marked, and when uploaded to TikTok, they'll be labeled as AI generated. This move extends TikTok's existing labeling of AI generated content to include content created outside the platform as well.
Meta's oversight board has upheld a decision to remove 2 Facebook posts. The posts in question urged Australians to vote multiple times in an Indigenous rights referendum. The posts failed to mention that voting multiple times is an offence in Australia.
At the time, Meta proactively identified the posts and sent it for human review. The social media platform eventually removed the 2 posts before Australia's Indigenous rights referendum was put to vote in October 2023. The board said in its ruling that while both the account holders were engaged in a heated political debate, that did not give them the right to call for others to engage in illegal behavior. Meta added that multiple votes could have impacted the rights of others, particularly the right to vote. The decision comes amidst the Australian government's plans to introduce penalties for internet platforms which fail to rein in misinformation and disinformation.
A team of US researchers have unveiled a new AI tool capable of instantly predicting suicidal thoughts and behaviors. The tool employs a simple picture ranking task alongside demographic factors, and according to its makers, it boasted an accuracy of 92%.
As per researchers, the tool's ability to quantify reward and aversion judgments offers deep insights into human preference behavior. Researchers claim the AI tool can prove to be a useful technology, highlighting its potential in aiding medical professionals, hospitals and the military to identify individuals most at risk of self-harm. As part of the research, the team surveyed over 4,000 American citizens aged between 18 to 70. It was found that the software was able to predict various levels of suicidal tendencies among its users.